Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Cliffhanger. So why am I talking about Cliffhanger today? Well, outside of the fact that this is just a super campy, awesome, badass action movie that is only my second time watching it, believe it or not, I wanted to talk about this movie today for two reasons. Firstly, the Cliffhanger remake is currently in production right now, starring Lily James and Pierce Brosnan, and I have no idea what that movie is going to be like. I don't really think Cliffhanger is a movie that really needs to be remade. I also didn't feel like The Crow was another movie that needed to be remade, and that one just looked terrible. So I guess we'll see. It's a little bit premature, my thoughts on a Cliffhanger remake. I guess I'd have to see a trailer for it in order to really give my opinion on that. So that's one reason I wanted to talk about it, is because before you know it, we're going to have a Cliffhanger remake coming out. And the second reason I wanted to talk about this movie is because Cliffhanger came out in an interesting time during big blockbuster action movies during the 90s, where there were a lot of movies that came out in the wake of Die Hard. And a lot of these movies used the Die Hard formula. And in fact, this is something that I talked about in my Die Hard 2 review that I did last year. And here's a little snippet of that video right now. And the Die Hard formula is one that many action movies have emulated after the success of Die Hard. Die Hard 2 included, which we'll get into that. But for example, there were a ton of movies that came out in the 90s in particular that took from the Die Hard formula. There's movies like Speed and Cliffhanger, just so I can show off my steelbooks of both these movies. So yeah, the formula being, action that takes place in a very specific location, and it takes place in that location for the entirety of the movie. A siege film is what it would be called. And I thought it would be kind of fun to contrast a Die Hard ripoff or Die Hard inspired movie with what's happening with modern action movies today, in that we are also having a bunch of action movies coming out in the wake of John Wick. There are a lot of action movies, one that I watched recently, which I'll talk a little bit about here, that are directly emulating the specific type of action filmmaking that John Wick really popularized when it came out, and those movies have been incredibly successful. And all of these John Wick-inspired films, with the exception of Nobody, which is one of my personal favorite action movies that's come out in the past couple of years, a lot of these movies that have come out have been really, really bad. In fact, I just saw a trailer for one that also looks just completely pointless, starring Josh Hartnett. The Fight or Flight, I think is the name of it. Looks like Bullet Train Part 2 as far as I'm concerned, but this time it's on a plane. How original. And it's obviously trying to copy the same action style as the John Wick movies and Bullet Train. And the movie that I watched most recently, Havoc, starring Tom Hardy and was directed by Gareth Evans, the same filmmaker who made the first two Raid movies. I was actually looking forward to that movie, and I watched it, and I thought it was so fucking bad. It was one of the worst newer action movies I've seen in some time. In fact, I was kind of flirting around with the idea of doing a video just talking about that movie, but I realized I could summarize my feelings on that movie in about one sentence, which I will read from my official Letterboxd. If you want an action movie with terrible visuals, shitty CGI, obnoxious shaky cam, forgettable characters, awful pacing, and a pointless convoluted plot, then oh boy, do I have the poor man's John Wick action movie for you. That's my thoughts on Havoc. And so comparing these two eras of action movies from the 90s that are emulating Die Hard and action movies of today that are emulating John Wick, there's one crucial thing that I really noticed, and that is, outside of the fact that many of the Die Hard ripoff action movies are significantly better than a lot of these terrible, disposable wannabe John Wick movies. Gunpowder Milkshake, that was another one where I was like, this movie is fucking awful. A lot of the Die Hard action ripoff movies are a lot of fun and have actually held up really well in regards of action filmmaking, because it was made during a time where filmmakers were using practical effects, and because of that, these action movies from that era, Cliffhanger being one of them, still feel so gritty and awesome and exciting and surprisingly violent, and has some balls to the filmmaking, where a lot of these newer movies, Havoc being one of them, are heavily digitally manipulated. They visually look ugly. The shaky cam nonsense is really fucking irritating to me. I hate that type of filmmaking, especially when it gets overly used. And so it just makes me appreciate this era of action movies a lot more. And in Cliffhanger, it was a movie that I watched fairly shortly after watching Havoc, and I was just like, see, this is what I want an action movie to feel like. I want an action movie that actually looks good, that has really visually exciting practical effects with memorable scenes and just fun ideas and just crazy over-the-top violence. I mean, Cliffhanger delivers on all of those fronts. And there's actually so many parallels between Cliffhanger and Die Hard, not just in terms of like a similar premise, but in terms of like similar plot beats that are taken directly from Die Hard that are kind of redone in Cliffhanger that I find amusing. But that's not points against the movie. I accept the movie for what it is, and I thoroughly enjoy it because of that. But before we get into the specifics, let's just give a brief overall synopsis of the plot. So Cliffhanger centers around the mountain climber rescue ranger Gabe Walker, who after suffering the tragedy of failing to rescue one of his friends and co-workers' girlfriend Sarah while they're stranded in the Colorado Rockies, about a year or so passes by, and he's looking to move out of that town, try to get away from this tragedy, try to make things right with his former girlfriend, Jessie, who's trying to help Gabe get over this tragedy and not try to run away from it, and them continuing their relationship. But this horrific event has caused a rift between not only him and his girlfriend, but him and his former friend, Hal, played by Michael Rooker. But things get complicated when a former military intelligence operative, Eric Quaylen, is orchestrating a robbery of over $100 million with these 3 briefcases that are being transported on a plane. Things go awry after the plane heist goes off the rails with a gunfight in one of the planes exploding and the briefcases getting lost on a mountain. Our characters then crash land the plane. They trick the rescue team into coming after them, but they're really holding them hostage and trying to get them to get a helicopter that they can commandeer to look for these 3 briefcases that are stranded on this mountain. But both Gabe and Hal are being held hostage by Quaylen and his team. Gabe makes an escape and is now acting independently on the mountaintop, and then he reunites with his girlfriend. And now Gabe is trying to sabotage Quaylen's attempt to get these briefcases while also trying to stop him and his team from killing himself, his girlfriend, and his former friend Hal. And that is essentially this movie in a nutshell. Now let's talk about the opening of Cliffhanger, which I have kind of mixed feelings about. On the one hand, it is probably the most famous scene in this movie. It is by far the most anxiety-inducing scene in the entire movie. It has the most legitimate tension, especially if you're like me and you have a fairly healthy fear of falling and basically anything that can kill you. The opening of this movie, when I first watched Cliffhanger, which I believe it or not, I first watched this movie just last year. When I was watching the movie and it opens up with that scene, I was like, oh, well, that was kind of gritty. That was kind of intense. That was kind of like traumatizing in the context of the story. Maybe this movie is going to be more of a serious thriller that's kind of in the vein of like First Blood, for example. It's more character driven as a result of that. And once the movie really kicks in, it really isn't like that at all. In fact, that's one of my problems with the opening of this movie, is that usually with most action movies, whenever there's an opening action scene, it's meant to kind of set the tone for the rest of the movie going forward. And that scene where Hal's girlfriend tragically falls to her death is so gritty and intense and really quite like serious and very sad, but the rest of the movie is very schlocky, over the top action nonsense. And you know, this is one of those movies that gets made fun of by professional climbers all the time for how incredibly unrealistic it is. And apparently that opening scene is also an example of how unrealistic that type of scenario would actually go down in reality. But regardless, it's effectively made and shot. My problem with it is that it's mainly used as a plot device for Gabe to kind of have an estranged relationship with his friend Hal and his girlfriend Jessie, similar to that of the estranged relationship between John McClane and his wife Holly, and we want to see them get together in the end as a result of that. But outside of that, it's not really used narratively or thematically throughout the rest of the movie, because most of this movie is dedicated to being a cat and mouse game between Quaylen and Gabe, which, by the way, John Lithgow in this movie, who I love John Lithgow, his English accent is horrible. And when I first heard him talk, I was like, okay, this movie's probably going to be a lot sillier than I initially thought it was going to be after watching that opening action sequence.
Let me jar your memory. If you don't recognize them, you're useless. Useless items are usually discarded.
Oh, bugger. I feel like a perfect arse.
And there's also just a ton of these wacky, ridiculous moments that I love, but that's my problem with the opening scene. So I already mentioned one parallel between Die Hard, which is the estranged relationship between two central characters. We see that in Die Hard. There's also the heist. I mean, Die Hard is based around a heist. Cliffhanger is also based around a heist. We have European-centric villains, specifically with that of John Lithgow, and in Die Hard we have Hans Gruber. There's also the scene where Gabe gets one of the briefcases and puts the tracker in it, but he already took out all the money, and he built a little snowman for theatrics, and then he put in a dollar bill, want to trade the money for Hal. That's very reminiscent of Now I Have a Machine Gun, ho, ho, ho. That's something that's like directly riffing on Die Hard right there. So yeah, this movie is a lot like Die Hard in more ways than one, but I'm okay with that because there's a lot of movies that emulate the Die Hard formula that I think are still super awesome. Speed being my personal favorite. Die Hard 2, which, by the way, same director, Rennie Harlin directed Cliffhanger, and before that he directed Die Hard 2. And Die Hard 2 in itself is also a Die Hard ripoff movie because it rips off the first Die Hard movie because it's a winning formula. And this movie, once it really gets going and you're just like in it in terms of like, all right, give me some awesome over-the-top action sequences, Cliffhanger fully delivers on that front. There are so many ridiculous, awesome scenes in this movie. One of the scenes where one of Quaylen's henchmen, who I think is the same actor in Cool Runnings, he plays a very memorable, super cheesy, over-the-top, really evil type of bad guy. He's beating the shit out of Sylvester Stallone, and then Sylvester Stallone grabs his crotch and his collar like a fucking WWE wrestler, and then he stabs him on the cave ceiling with one of those phallic-shaped things. I don't know the name of those things, but it impales him, and then it gets pretty bloody from there. There's also a super badass scene where Dr. Phil is going after Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone's underwater and he has that bolt gun that we saw earlier and he kills him with that bolt gun. I mean, this movie, when it gets violent, it doesn't really pull its punches. And it's super, it's like, oh, damn, this movie gets kind of gory. I like that. We also have the scene where Hal is getting the shit beat out of him by one of the other British bad guys who was a former striker, footballer, and then he stabs him with the knife that he took off Frank's body, and then he shotgun shoots him off the mountain. I mean, there's so many awesome scenes. There's also like those two like Bill and Ted dudes where one of them gets killed tragically, and then the other one just jumps off the mountain with the parachute. And I will say, like, as silly and as unrealistic as this movie is, in terms of the visuals, Cliffhanger absolutely holds up. I mean, the action, for as silly as it gets, it looks very practical. In fact, the opening plane sequence, which is very reminiscent of The Dark Knight Rises, where we have the Dr. Phil character, he's going to zip line from one plane to another plane. That was an actual stunt. That stunt man got paid $1 million to do that for real. I believe the producers were going to have that, they weren't going to be able to get insurance on that. And so Sylvester Stallone took a pay cut. He's like, I will pay that out of my own pocket and you guys can pay me less because that stunt needs to be in the movie because it's going to be awesome. And it's crazy. That's a real stunt. And so there's some crazy stuff in this movie that, as silly as it is in terms of practicality, in execution, it looks really good. And that's one of the things I really love about this movie is that it's a good looking movie. I love the location of being on this mountain. It never feels boring at any point. In fact, once Gabe escapes from the bad guys, the movie does not stop until we get to the end. And then the ending is pretty fucking awesome, where Gabe throws the money into the helicopter blades and Quaylen is kind of out of control, and then the helicopter almost crashes while Sylvester Stallone's hanging from that ladder. Some of these scenes I'm looking at, I'm like, how did they do that? Because did they really get a helicopter that close to a stuntman? Probably not, but however they filmed it, it still looks really fucking good. We get probably one of the best Sylvester Stallone one-liners in that scene as well.
Remember, shithead, keep your arms and legs in the vehicle, and all.
They're fighting on the end of the helicopter, and then Gabe gets off of it, and the helicopter falls with Quaylen inside, and one of the great over-the-top movie deaths. And then the movie kind of just ends, kind of abruptly, in my opinion, where we have these U.S. government guys, which we established very briefly early in the movie. They're like, oh, hey, well, you guys got away, and Quaylen's dead. They didn't get the money. Right on. All right, we'll send someone to help you. And the movie kind of just ends right there. I almost wish there was an epilogue where Gabe, we actually see Gabe and Hal like maybe sometime after the whole incident, and they rekindle their friendship and they learn to forgive each other. That would make the opening scene of this movie feel like more appropriate and feel necessary to the story, because that's one of the things I have a problem with the opening, is that it doesn't really come back later at any point. It's just kind of used as a plot device. But regardless, it's an iconic scene, and this movie is filled with so many ridiculous, awesome scenes that I can't help but enjoy it. And I'm so glad that I finally got around to watching it. Like, this is one of those movies that I've just been wanting to watch for a long time, and I just never got around to it. I'm like, I'm going to get it. I'm going to watch this movie. And I absolutely loved it the first time I saw it last year, and that's why I watched it again yesterday, because after watching Havoc and a couple of other and Bullet Train and those other John Wick terrible ripoff movies, I'm like, I want to watch a good action ripoff movie that rips off an iconic action movie but does it better than those terrible movies do. And Cliffhanger, 2 thumbs way up, to quote my boys Siskel and Ebert. This movie fucking rocks. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Cliffhanger. Really enjoyed this movie because I'm just a sucker for awesome schlocky action. But I want to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on Cliffhanger? Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? And what are some of your favorite Die Hard ripoff or Die Hard inspired movies? List it in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.